Imagine you're sitting here with me for a second, because what I'm about to show you, you've probably already heard before. Not once, not twice, but enough times that it started to feel normal. That's how it works. Nobody wakes up one day and says, "I'm being controlled." It doesn't look like control in the beginning. It sounds like concern. It feels like love. It hides inside words that seem harmless, even caring, until they're not. The truth is, narcissistic control is rarely loud. It's quiet, repetitive, subtle. It's built through phrases that slowly reshape how you think, how you react, and eventually, how you see yourself. And the most dangerous part? You don't notice it happening. You start adjusting. You start explaining yourself more. You start doubting your own reactions. And without realizing it, you begin to shrink, just to keep the peace. That's not an accident. Narcissists don't control through force. They control through language. Carefully chosen phrases that trigger guilt, confusion, obligation, and self-doubt. Each one designed to keep you emotionally off balance while they stay in control. And once you understand these phrases, something shifts, because you stop reacting the way they expect. You stop playing the role they've quietly assigned to you. In this video, I'm going to break down 5 of the most common phrases narcissists use to control you. The ones that sound normal on the surface, but carry something much deeper underneath. And as you listen, you might start recognizing them. Not just in others, but in moments you've already lived. Pay attention, because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Part 1. You're too sensitive. This is one of the most dangerous phrases a narcissist uses, because it doesn't attack you directly, it redefines you. At first, it sounds small, almost dismissible. You react to something they said. Maybe it was disrespectful, maybe it crossed a line. And instead of addressing what they did, they shift the focus to you. You're too sensitive. You always overreact. It's not that deep. And just like that, the conversation is no longer about their behavior. It's about your reaction. That's the move, because now, instead of holding them accountable, you start questioning yourself. You pause. You replay the moment in your head. You wonder if maybe you did take it too far. And this is where control begins. A narcissist doesn't need to win the argument. They just need to make you doubt your position in it. Once that happens, you start adjusting. You speak less. You tolerate more. You ignore things that should have been addressed, not because they changed, but because you don't trust your own emotional response anymore. That's the real damage. Over time, you're too sensitive because you even express how you feel. You're already editing yourself, softening your tone, minimizing your experience, trying not to seem like too much. And the more you do that, the easier you become to control. Because now, they don't even have to say the phrase anymore. You say it to yourself. That's when you know it worked. But here's the truth most people miss. Sensitivity is not the problem. Your reaction is often a signal. It's your mind telling you that something feels off, something crossed a boundary, something didn't sit right. And instead of listening to that signal, this phrase trains you to ignore it. That's not emotional maturity. That's conditioning. Once you see this clearly, you stop defending your feelings like they're a weakness. You start recognizing them as information. And more importantly, you stop letting someone else define what you're allowed to feel. Part 2. I was just joking. This one is subtle, but it cuts deep. Because it doesn't just dismiss what happened, it rewrites it. It usually comes right after they say something that clearly crosses a line. A disrespectful comment, a jab at your insecurities, something that felt intentional. You react, and instead of owning it, they lean back and say, "Relax, I was just joking." You can't take a joke? It's not that serious. Now pay attention to what just happened. They said something that affected you, but somehow you're the one being put on trial, not for what they did, but for how you responded. That's the trap, because now you're not just dealing with the original comment, you're dealing with the pressure of not wanting to look uptight, boring, or too emotional. So what do most people do? They laugh it off, even when it didn't feel funny, even when it hit something real. And in that moment, something small but important breaks. You abandon your own reaction to protect their image. That's control. A narcissist uses humor as a shield. It gives them the freedom to say disrespectful things without taking responsibility for them. And if you call it out, they don't have to defend the comment. They just attack your ability to take a joke. So either way, they win. If you stay quiet, they keep doing it. If you speak up, you look like the problem. Over time, this creates a pattern. They test boundaries through jokes. They watch what you tolerate. They slowly push further each time. And because it's all framed as humor, it becomes harder to call out without feeling like you're overreacting. But here's the reality. A joke that consistently targets your insecurities isn't a joke. It's a message, disguised in a way that gives them deniability. Once you understand that, you stop playing along. You stop forcing yourself to laugh at things that don't feel right. You stop shrinking your reaction just to keep things light, because respect doesn't need to be hidden behind humor. And anyone who constantly uses, "I was just joking," to excuse disrespect knows exactly what they're doing. Part 3. After everything I've done for you. This is where control becomes emotional leverage, because now it's not about what's right or wrong anymore. It's about debt. This phrase usually shows up the moment you set a boundary, the moment you say no, the moment you stop playing along. Suddenly, the energy shifts. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? I guess I mean nothing to you. And just like that, you're no longer standing your ground. You're defending your character. That's the strategy. A narcissist keeps a mental record of everything they've ever done for you, not out of generosity, but as future ammunition. So when you step out of line, they don't address the situation directly. They pull out the ledger. And now, you feel pressure. Not because you're wrong, but because you don't want to seem ungrateful. You don't want to look like the bad person. You don't want to erase the good they've done. So what do? You give in. You explain yourself more than necessary. You soften your boundary. You start negotiating with something that should have been clear. And this is where they win, because your decisions are no longer based on what's right for you. They're based on guilt. That's the hook. Over time, this creates a dynamic where you feel like you owe them. Like every favor, every gift, every moment of kindness comes with an invisible contract attached. And the cost? Your freedom to say no. But here's the truth you need to lock in. Real generosity doesn't come with a scoreboard. If someone only reminds you of what they've done when you don't comply, it was never about helping you. It was about controlling you. Once you see that, something shifts. You stop confusing guilt with obligation. You stop allowing past favors to override present boundaries. And most importantly, you realize that you don't owe anyone access to you, just because they once did something nice. Part 4. You're imagining things. This is where it gets dangerous, because now it's not just about controlling your reactions, it's about controlling your reality. You notice something feels off. Their behavior changed. Their words don't match their actions. Something doesn't add up. So you bring it up. Calm, direct, clear. And instead of addressing it, they look at you and say, "You're imagining things. That never happened. You're making it up." And just like that, the ground shifts under your feet. Because now you're not arguing about what they did. You're questioning what you saw. That's the move. This is what people call gaslighting. But forget the label for a second and focus on the effect. It creates confusion. You replay conversations in your head. You second-guess your memory. You start wondering if you misunderstood something that felt obvious just moments ago. And the more this happens, the less you trust yourself. That's the goal. A narcissist doesn't need to prove they're right. They just need to make you unsure that you are. Because once your certainty is gone, you become easier to influence, easier to silence, easier to control. Now you hesitate before bringing things up. You gather proof for things you already experienced. You even start apologizing for things you're not sure you did. That's not miscommunication. That's manipulation. Over time, this can break something deeper than confidence. It breaks your connection to your own perception. And when that happens, you don't just lose arguments, you lose clarity. But here's what you need to understand. Your experience matters. If something felt off, it's worth paying attention to. If something didn't sit right, that signal didn't come from nowhere. You don't need someone else's permission to trust what you saw, what you heard, or what you felt. Because the moment you hand that over, you give them control over your reality. And once someone controls your reality, controlling everything else becomes easy. Part 5. If you really cared about me, you would... This is where control turns into emotional blackmail, because now your feelings are being used against you. This phrase doesn't sound aggressive. It sounds vulnerable, almost sincere. If you really cared about me, you would understand. If you loved me, you wouldn't say no. If I mattered to you, this wouldn't even be a question. But listen carefully. This isn't about love. It's about compliance. A narcissist ties your worth to your willingness to give in. They set up a condition where your loyalty, your care, your entire relationship is measured by one thing. Do you do what they want or not? And if you don't, now you're the problem. You're cold. You're selfish. You don't care enough. That's the trap. Because instead of evaluating the request itself, whether it's reasonable, whether it crosses your boundaries, you're pulled into proving your feelings. So what do? You overextend. You say yes when you mean no. You sacrifice your comfort just to avoid being seen as the bad one. And slowly, your boundaries disappear. Not because you didn't have them, but because every time you tried to enforce them, they were turned into a test of your love. That's manipulation at its cleanest. Because now, saying no doesn't just feel difficult, it feels like betrayal. But here's the truth you need to understand. Real care doesn't demand proof through sacrifice. Real respect doesn't punish you for having limits. And real connection doesn't force you to choose between your boundaries and being seen as someone who cares. Once you see this clearly, the dynamic changes. You stop chasing approval. You stop trying to prove your feelings. You stop negotiating your standards just to keep the peace. Because you realize something most people miss. Anyone who makes you feel like you have to earn the right to be respected was never respecting you to begin with. Conclusion. Now you see it. Not as random comments, not as just how they talk, but as a pattern. Each phrase does the same thing in a different way. It shifts focus off them and puts it back on you. It replaces clarity with confusion. It turns your emotions into something you feel you have to justify. And over time, if you don't catch it, you start living in a constant state of self-doubt. That's how control works. Quiet, repetitive, almost invisible, until you step back and connect the dots. But here's where everything changes. Awareness breaks the pattern. Because once you recognize these phrases for what they really are, you stop reacting automatically. You stop getting pulled into the same emotional loops. You start pausing, observing, choosing your response instead of being driven by it. And that alone shifts the dynamic. You don't need to argue more. You don't need to explain yourself better. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to see clearly. Because the moment you stop accepting manipulation disguised as normal conversation is the moment their control starts slipping. And from there, you're no longer playing their game. You're walking away from it.